As everyone's joining us today, if you would like to, you're more than welcome to come off mute, say hi, chat with me as we go to get started. If you would prefer to, keep your cameras off, you're more than welcome to. The one thing that I'm always interested in is to find out where everybody's joining us from. So if you want to either come off mute and talk about it, we can do that. Or if you prefer to just put your location into the chat, you're more than welcome to do that as well. We've got about 4 minutes here before we get started with questions. And to get everybody started, my name's Meg and I'm from Ohio.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Siobhan Thompson, and I'm calling from, zooming in from Fort Washington, Maryland. Some people call it the DMV area. So that's Virginia and DC, but nice to see everyone, and I look forward to learning more.
Thanks for joining us, Siobhan.
Thank you.
Everyone, my name is Lauren, of course, and I am calling Southeast Virginia.
Awesome, very cool. Thanks for joining us, Lauren. All right, we've got about 3 minutes before we get started. Just to let everybody know how this is going to go in case maybe you haven't joined office hours before. I'll do a real quick housekeeping run through after we start the recording right at noon. And then I'll introduce our guest for today. She'll kind of give you a little bit of background on herself, and then we will get started. Welcome to everybody who's just joining us. If you are just coming on, you're more than welcome. We've got 2 minutes left until the chat starts. So you're more than welcome to come off mute or turn your cameras on if you'd like to see some fresh faces today. I know I very highly value seeing new people, especially now during quarantine. So you're more than welcome to do that if you'd like. No pressure though if you don't feel like you want to. And then if you would like to tell everybody where you're joining from, you can either, like I said, come off mute and we can talk about stuff, or you can put that information into the chat. I'm always really interested to find out where people are joining us from. Ooh, thanks for sharing that, Siobhan. Awesome. Okay. Oh, Amber's joining us from Birmingham, Alabama. Very nice.
Morning, everybody. My name is Michaela Phillips, joining from Seattle, Washington.
Morning, Michaela. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Heather's coming in from San Diego. Awesome, Heather. Thanks for joining. All right, I'm going to start us recording here so that way we can get going right at noon. We've got less than a minute to go. All right, so good morning, everyone. Happy, what is it, Wednesday, I think? Days don't really mean much anymore, so happy Wednesday to everybody. Thanks for joining us. For anybody who doesn't know or has yet to join a Chat and Learn or office hours hosted by me, my name's Meg. I'm part of the marketing team here at PowerToFly, and I am super excited to jump into today's topic with our guest, Madalena. So before we get started, real quick housekeeping. Today is all about you guys and about getting your questions answered. So we've got we've reorganized the questions that were submitted. So Madalena has organized them in a way that's kind of thematic and makes more sense to her for answering purposes. But that being said, if you have other questions that occur to you, you are more than welcome to come off mute and ask. You can put them into the chat if you'd like, and I will float those to Madalena as time allows and as we can fit them into our our questions and our subjects. What else? Oh, if you're not actively speaking to the rest of the group, please make sure you're on mute, just so we don't have any kind of crosstalk or audio interference from anybody. And yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So again, my name is Meg. I'm here from PowerToFly, and I'm very excited to jump into today's topic with you all with Madalena Tanasi. So Madalena, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Thank you, Meg, and hello, everyone. I'm very, very excited to be here and to make the most of this half an hour that we have today on a very important topic. A little bit about myself and about my leadership philosophy and how I think about performance and accountability to really set the context of how I'm thinking about this and how I'm going to answer them. I did spend a great deal of my career in engineering leadership roles, over a decade leading engineering teams at Medidata Solutions. That is a SaaS company doing software for clinical trials. And currently I'm leading the operations and excellence group at Culibra that covers all kind of aspects of technology, from cloud ops to elements of PMO support and quality assurance architecture. Very, very technical role. So my experience and perspective is going to be very much from that angle of managing technology teams and leading technology teams. A little bit about my philosophy. I was greatly influenced by two very popular trends from about 10 years ago. One was a TED talk from Dan Pink on what motivates people. And the premise there, and he did a really great job providing data around it, was that we are all motivated by mastery and doing meaningful work. So I've always assumed that people want to do the right thing and want to get better at their job. And if they're given the right context and environment, they are going to thrive. Another big trend from 10 years ago when I got into management was Netflix's context versus control. And that has also greatly influenced how I'm thinking about leading teams and setting them for success and making them self-managed and accountable. So that's a little bit about myself and philosophy. On the questions that were submitted today, as Meg said, I've grouped them in 4 different categories. One is around managing remote and the reality that we're all facing right now with moving from partially remote or not at all remote to fully remote. There are obviously some complexities that come with this reality. So definitely something to discuss today. Another theme that emerged was managing or keeping teams accountable when you're not managing them directly or not, you're leading without authority. Kind of situations where you're the product owner or an indirect manager of a team, but you're responsible for them delivering. A third theme is around the challenges of being a woman leader. As we all know, there are all kinds of complexities there that are only more visible now. And lastly, just some best practices and personal experience. So before I jump into any of these 4 themes, anyone wants to raise their hand on a preference on which one we should start with? And if no one has a preference, I'll go in the order that I just mentioned. But if anyone has a preference on a team, we might not be able to go through all of them. That's why I would like to kind of open the floor for the people that are here on what they would prefer.
Go ahead, Siobhan.
If possible, could we start with managing teams that we're not directly in charge of?
Absolutely. So on that team, I think and all of the answers are honestly going to be related and fall in that team that I just mentioned of context versus control and setting teams for success. I think in general, but also when you're not directly responsible for people, being very transparent, having clear instructions and explaining what you need and why, it's very, very important to set a team for success. And you probably noticed that I'm speaking about teams and not individuals. I really believe that now more than ever, we should focus on the teams and teams being productive and be more flexible about individuals and what they do and how they best work. So in general, but also when you lead through influence and not directly, setting the context right, being transparent about what are your objectives and your expectations and finding that shared goal and meaning, it's very, very important. I'm actually in a role right now of leading through influence, and how I've approached it. I'm also new at the company. So one question was around managing when you're new, and being new is a little bit as leading through influence, because while you have people report to you directly, they don't know you. You're still the new person in the house. So Definitely communication, transparency, making sure that the goals are clear, measurable, constantly rehashing them, constantly following up on, did you understand what's expected? Do you agree with it? Do you have questions? Do you have concerns? Is very important. And I'm going to look into this section and see if I can go a little bit more specific on the answers. One question was around the org has a matrix reporting structure and it's hard to align goals and feedback for the individuals. This is a situation that is common, but is also very, very complicated. It's difficult to align groups that you don't lead directly if you actually don't have goals that align with your peers. So in this particular situation, my recommendation would be to surface those differences in goals to a common manager and ask for mediation. I don't like escalation as a matter of principle. I think it's important to speak with your peers and surface those, saying, hey, I have this goal and you have this goal and they all tie into this objective, but they are not really the same. What should we do? Try to find that alignment with your peer and then go to the common manager and say, hey, we think that there are some discrepancies. We would like to adjust our goals in this way. If you don't agree with your peer, go directly to the manager and say, we need mediation here because clearly we are going different direction. But that's really the prerequisite to succeeding, in my opinion, to succeeding in any context, and even more now, having a clarity of what we are working and a way to measure and track progress is important. Another question in this area was, this was an interesting one. How do you hold your team accountable when most of them are family members? This is a very interesting one because, you know, there isn't any real hierarchy when you work with your family members, but that same theme applies. And being transparent about your needs, finding the common goals, and persuading people to work together towards those shared goals and what's in it for me, what is that common objective is probably a theme here. How are you doing with time, Meg? We're doing good.
You're doing perfectly. I'll keep you appraised of time, no worries.
Okay. Any follow-up from anyone on this theme of managing through influence or leading through influence and keeping your teams accountable? And Siobhan, did I answer? Would you like to follow up a little bit on this one, go into something more specific?
No, you answered it perfectly. I wasn't sure if there was a difference in speaking with like your team when it comes to family, and if you should communicate with them differently than with a regular team. But I like what you said about letting them know what your expectations are and being very transparent.
It's expectation, but also needs. Often in general, but also now more than ever, being very open about your constraints and your needs and acknowledging that everybody has different circumstances and has to balance competing challenges, that you maybe have somebody else in your working space, that maybe your availability is different. Like being transparent on objectives and needs is critically important, and even more with the family, because often, you know, the lines are blurred and you really don't know how to navigate some complexities there, but probably I would apply the same principles with family members. Okay, anybody else on this team before we move on? And for full disclosure, I follow a 7 seconds rule for introverts. I count to 7 in my head before I move on. Okay, next, the remaining 3 topics are around working remote and managing remote and all the challenges around remoteness. The challenges around being a woman leader, and some examples of best practices and something that I've seen work. Any preference on which one we should tackle next? Okay, well, let's go in order then. The challenges of working remote. So the first question here in this group is, in your experience, have you seen productivity go up or down due to remote working? I've seen a combination of both. I would say that teams that are globally distributed and have been functional in the past before this reality of being fully remote have actually got more productive. I've got feedback from some teams that found that being forced to communicate only in writing and via Zoom meetings and document more, they've seen a greater alignment and increased productivity. For teams that have relied heavily on the in-person interaction and that water-cooler conversations, it's been a lot more difficult to adjust. Everybody is actually working harder in my experience. Well, initially concerns from leadership have been around decreased capacity. In my experience across a number of teams, people are actually working longer hours and they're connected more. That's not necessarily translating to an increased productivity, mostly because there is still clunkiness around the best way to communicate something. There are a lot of meetings that are redundant. There's been an attempt to really recreate that in-person interaction, and there are like meetings over meetings over meetings where the same information from different angles is presented, and sometimes there are discrepancies. So I would say that the key to succeeding in this environment is really formalizing more the communication and decision making and centralizing it, relying on some meetings and that direct communication channel, but not having that be the only one. Because if you just try to recreate that in-person way of communicating via Zoom meetings, you're probably going to end up with a number of people that hear the same information a lot of times, and some people that are missed. And also with the same information being presented slightly different from one meeting to another meeting, a facet or an aspect that creates confusion. And the last question in this group was around how do I keep those I manage accountable in a remote setting without micromanaging? And this is an interesting one. So as I said, I did start in a new role, and I felt that I'm really free or immune from micromanaging, because I was like, I'm new here. I really don't know that much about technology. I can't really chime in on priorities. I can't really chime in on the estimates that our team are producing. There's no way I could micromanage. And I did have a conversation recently with one of my mentors that pointed out to me that micromanaging is not necessarily jumping in and doing the work of your teams. Could be, in fact, asking too many questions, going too deep into their business, and not letting them make those decisions and really burying them into under this pile of questions. And it was a pretty big revelation for me, because I was like, no, there is no way I could micromanage even if I wanted to, which I don't. But that was actually a very interesting point that I took to heart, and I try to be a lot more mindful on how many questions I ask. So I went back and leaned on that context, going to my peers or people in my organization saying, this is what I need done. How about you? Take a step back, connect with this other person, see what you can come up with. And if you need me to chime in and have an opinion, I will do it, but I would very much prefer that you come up with a solution and you present it to me. And if I have an objection, I'll tell you. So I've definitely tried that more as a strategy to not micromanage. Anybody has a question or a follow-up?
I have a question for you from that I get a lot. So I'm curious for your input. A lot of people that I talk about managing remote are wondering, how can you manage team performance? How do you know if people perform when they are remote?
One thing, even before this remote situation, I tried to focus on teams, not on individuals. I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope, especially with engineers, if you try to go too much into measuring at the individual level. And again, I'm speaking from managing engineers perspective, and I know that in other groups it's a little bit easier to manage and measure individuals, but engineers are very, very creative when it comes to gaming the system, and they take great offense in being measured as individuals. So in my previous life, we've looked a little bit at I think it's called Git Prime. There is some tool that you can configure on top of your source control and see activity and look like how many code changes you get from an individual, how much churn you have on some code that is submitted by an engineer. And I found that there was an overall resistance when we looked at the data and tried to link it to an individual. So, but it was actually very well received when we looked at trends, and we said, this team is actually consistently delivering. They are predictable. They deliver good quality. And we noticed these trends. We noticed that the changes that they submit are smaller, that they have a good process around reviewing it, which makes sure that the quality is better. So I'm looking at metrics around the teams. Are they predictable? Are they moving fast enough? Are they delivering good quality? And putting measures around teams. And if you set context and people are motivated, they tend to self-regulate. If there is someone in a team that is a low performer, somehow that bubbles up and the team does something about it, either by raising it to management and saying this person is slacking or clearly struggling, or they're maybe in the wrong role. They surface it. I haven't really felt the need to go at the individual level. Does this answer it, Limor?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
There was a question raised in the chat. Siobhan had asked, can you use these same measurement styles for individuals as well as teams? If not, why is that?
Again, with engineers, I found that is not working well to try to have measures applied across individuals. There are different working styles. People prefer to work at different hours. There are like the morning people and night owls. There are people that prefer to work together with a peer, like the pair programming is popular. There are people that felt that they are absolutely distracted if they have to pair program. So I haven't found a measure, at least for engineering, that could be applied to individuals. There are best practices and patterns that work on the majority of people, but whenever I try to enforce one measure across, I found engineers be just group together and protest it and find ways to game the system. If you're looking at lines of code, they're going to put a lot of lines there and make sure that there is a lot of code produced. Or if you're speaking about small pull requests, they are just going to break a story into 10 different sections. And it's like, yeah, we did. So I haven't found anything that works. It could be because I deal with engineers that are notorious for not wanting to be measured.
Thank you for breaking that down. I think that's really helpful for a lot of people. Just to let you know, we have 10 minutes left in today's chat.
Okay, so the next topic that I wanted to touch a little bit on is around the challenges of being a woman in a leadership role. And the two questions that came in this section are: how do we deal with strong male personalities who show the reluctance to learn or listen from a female lead? How do I gain their trust and respect if I've been feeling overlooked as the only female? For full disclosure, I was a little bit hesitant on going into this topic, mostly because I feel that I'm not, I don't feel that I'm very representative in this situation. I've been very involved with women in tech and a lot of women groups in the last 4 or 5 years. And I acknowledge that there is a wide diversity of perspectives and experiences, and how women have gotten positions of power and how they are perceived, and just how they cope with various challenges. So I often feel that I've had it easier than a lot of women that I've spoken with. I've been really privileged to grow up in an environment that empowered me. So I feel like I've been a little bit more immune to the imposter syndrome. I never had that feeling that I don't belong in a place. And I pretty much went and was like, I'm here and I'm here to stay, and I'm loud and I'm vocal. The only thing that I would say on this topic, I think it's important to be very authentic. and recognize there isn't one way and one recipe for being successful as a woman in a leadership role. And the single most important thing is to be authentic, to find your voice and your way of speaking that is truly you. There are two things that matter when influencing, what was the word there? Strong male personalities. One is you need to be confident, and you need to be you. Like you are there because people believe that you belong there, and you need to believe it first. And then if people speak over you, take a break and say it again. And they still speak over you, say it again. I know that there are all these things around having allies and people amplifying the voice, and those absolutely work. But if you believe that you really belong there, and you restate it until people hear, eventually they will stop speaking over you, and they will recognize that you actually belong there, and they will feel ashamed that they keep speaking over you. So don't get intimidated if people speak over you. You are there, you belong there, and the people that chose you to be in that role did it because you deserve it. So find your voice, find your authentic self, and you belong there. Own it. But there isn't one way of doing it. Anyone wants to?
Yeah, I want to comment on that because obviously, I mean, I've been in situations like that, actually many situations like that in the past. I think it's a combination, from my experience, at least it's a combination of things. I actually feel like finding allies is really important because eventually you need people that can advocate for you. I also believe in going headstrong in front of, usually there are specific individuals. So I believe that if you're in a team setup where people are not respecting you, the best strategy would be to go directly to this person, not in front of other people, but in a one-on-one setting, and just say it up in front of them. Like, kind of, I'm not saying like a fight with them, but be very direct and kind of say, I do not accept this, behavior from you. I want to understand what's going on. Like, kind of try to get with them on the same page of what you expect them to behave, how you expect them to behave, and the respect that you expect from them. And if they don't agree with you, then I would even consider escalating, because you need, I agree with you, you need to be very, very confident in yourself, and you need to put those people, but in a one-on-one, right. I prefer to do it in a one-on-one setup in their place, rather than it can be nasty if you do it in a group setup.
I agree, and then I didn't like. Let me maybe clarify one thing. I think allies are important. I just also want to acknowledge that in many circumstances, those are not there, or they don't notice these things. And my point of being confident that you belong there was, if you don't have an ally, if you don't have someone to lean in, don't give up, and don't just settle for not having a seat at the table. Advocate for yourself. And it is indeed, if it's a gross offense, go and speak with the people after the fact. That's always the best way to approach things. But also, in a meeting or when you give direction, if you notice that people are not listening or speak over you, restating and restating again, not in an aggressive way or putting people on the spot, but just making yourself heard is important. And it can be in all kind of ways, whatever is aligned with your authentic self. Again, trying to do something that is not you probably will backfire because it's not going to come out right. That's what I would say. There isn't one way of doing it, and sometimes through allies. Okay, and we do have 5 minutes, and I want to touch a little bit on the other section. So a few questions that we got on some best practices. I think we spoke a little bit on some personal experience of improving team ownership. I really believe that context versus control, setting up clear goals, clear objectives, empowering the teams to find a solution has worked for me time and again. And I'm continuing to do that, making my teams, direct or indirect teams, partners into those goals. there was a question around gamification and does that work? I find that gamification works for specific, for me, it hasn't worked for long-term goals, like having this competition across teams for long-term deliverables or as a tactic. I haven't seen it work. It does work if you have a specific deliverable. If you say, hey, we're going to focus on cutting infrastructure costs for the next 2 months, and the team that comes up with the most saving gets a percentage of it. Or we are going to do a bug bounty. We're going to fix all the bugs. The team that fixes most bugs is going to get something. Or we're going to moving to continuous delivery. And the team that is going to deploy the most often is going to be highlighted. It works for very specific goals. And when you have a target, I haven't seen work as constantly competing across teams. Definitely spotlighting the teams that are doing well frequently gets them motivated. But I don't know if the person that put this question on gamification is on the call and wants to follow up, I would be happy to hear. Another one was, I'm wondering if you have any advice for lower level leaders who are concerned about the inadequacy of all measurements and need to persuade execs to adopt newer, more insightful specific metrics. On persuading stakeholders to do anything, including adopting new measures, I found that it works to start small, to go there and say, not I want to change this, but rather I would like to try this new measure. I think is going to produce this change. Would you be willing to allow me to try it for 3 months? And after 3 months, evaluate or something like that. I was able to introduce a lot more meaningful changes and make them permanent by approaching it as a trial. Be very transparent about why I want that change, what I'm hoping to get out of it. Also being very transparent that I don't know if it's going to work, but this is how I'm going to measure. And then measuring it, coming back to the team that sponsored me and showing them the results. And actually, if it worked and it's good, say thank you. And if it didn't, say thank you for allowing me to try it. So that's that. We do have 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really, agree with you that being very data-driven is always helpful when you need to convince someone and to choose whatever direction you're proposing.
And also if it's something really new or possibly controversial, to start small and do it as a trial. Unless you already have a lot of data to prove that it's needed, and then you just go directly with the data and say, we absolutely need to do this, and I know it's going to work, I would suggest setting a trial to collect that data and make a case for it. All right.
I think that's a really good point to make. And thank you for calling that out, because I feel like not a lot of people use maybe the trial method or the A/B testing kind of idea that is pretty common in engineering, but it's not really common outside of it. And a lot of the tips and stuff that you've given us today are yes, from like an engineering mindset to start with, but they're very applicable in a multitude of industries. So thank you for that, Madalena. So we have about a minute left. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with, or any last thoughts that you had for us, or anything like that?
Maybe last thought. Don't be too hard on yourself. I think it's very much applicable to women. We keep ourselves to impossible high standards, and this is the time for us to take a deep breath and keep ourselves to reasonable standards. We are all trying our very best. We're all working probably harder than we've ever worked before, and we're doing just fine. So maybe that's really the parting thought here.
Thank you.
And thank you all for your time.
Yeah. So thank you so much to Madalena for joining us and lending us your expertise today. And thank you so much to our PowerToFly community members who joined us and submitted such wonderful questions. I put a couple links in the chat if you want to check out some of our upcoming events that we'll be having, either further office hour sessions like today, or our longer chat and learn sessions, which are an hour long each. So I've put links to that all in the group chat. And yeah, just thank you to everybody for joining us. And I hopefully look forward to seeing more of you join us again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good Wednesday.